I started realizing, well, nothing is put in the Bible by chance. And I started realizing the Lord is trying to tell us something about exercising. He's trying to tell us something about walking in particular. And I want us to listen to this little clip to see what we get from it. It's a clip that I heard from NPR, and it's about exercising.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. A lot of what you know about exercising, running, and stretching may be wrong. My guest Gretchen Reynolds writes about conventional wisdom about exercise and fitness that is being overturned by new scientific studies. Her new book is called The First 20 Minutes. Surprising Science Reveals How We Can Exercise Better, Train Smarter, Live Longer. Reynolds writes the phys ed column for the New York Times Well blog. Gretchen Reynolds, welcome to Fresh Air.
So, thank you very much for having me.
My pleasure. Let me tell you my dilemma. I was reading your book, which was convincing me that I have to exercise more. But of course, I couldn't exercise because I had to finish your book before I went to sleep, which is kind of what happens to me every night. Most people have their equivalent reason of why they can't exercise. So just to make us feel a little bit worse and to scare us a little bit more about the consequences, what happens to your muscles or your tendons if you sit still for too long?
Well, sitting is unfortunately very unhealthy, and I do it constantly, so it worries me. What science is finding is that sitting for long periods of time, when you don't stand up, don't move at all, tends to cause changes physiologically within your muscles that cause a whole host of changes, the most dire being that you stop breaking up fat in your bloodstream. You start getting accumulations of fat. And what that causes is you get accumulations of fat then in your liver, your heart, your brain. And you just get sleepy, you gain weight, you basically are much less healthy than if you're moving.
And what happens to your muscles and your spine?
Terrible things. Your muscles become much more slack. They're much less able then to respond when you do stand up. And your spine, you get back pain, you have all sorts of unhealthy changes that make it that much harder then to move later. So the big problem with sitting a lot is it makes it harder then to move later, which is what you need to be doing.
If you're just joining us, my guest is Gretchen Reynolds, and she writes the phys ed column for the Well blog on the New York Times online. She's the author of the new book, The First 20 Minutes. That's about the science of exercise. So you're a runner, and you've been a runner for decades.
Mm-hmm.
What does science say now about the benefits and the risks of running?
Well, the benefits are unequivocal. Running is a wonderful way to reduce your risk of heart disease, reduce your risk of diabetes. If you run regularly, it does maintain your weight. It also has a very strong impact on the brain, which may be the single most important reason that I run. There's very good science that running for even half an hour or so doubles the number of brain cells in portions of your brain related to memory. Running is wonderful for the health of your body. It also leads almost inexorably to injury. The injury rate among runners is extremely high. By some estimates, it's 75% of runners will get injured almost every year. So running can be very hard on the body at the same time that it's very good for the body.
What about walking? I mean, there doesn't seem to be much of a downside to walking. What are the benefits of it?
Oh, walking is, I would say without a doubt, the single best exercise that exists. It is very low impact. Certainly you can hurt yourself if you want to. You can trip over something, you can
There's
overdo
always
it.
something to trip on.
You can run into things, which I've done before.
Absolutely.
I actually used to read and walk when I was in college. I would try and read my textbooks while walking, and I did a few times run into stop signs. So that's one way to injure yourself. Otherwise, walking appears to be what the human body is built for. There have been some very good studies showing that the most efficient stride for the human body is a walk, not a run. That means we use less oxygen, we use less energy when we walk than when we run. We are built for that movement. It does definitely stimulate all of the health benefits that you want from exercise. Walking for 30 minutes or even 20 minutes, even 15 minutes, will reduce your risk for heart disease and for diabetes. It will change your brain, and it will prolong your life. There was a really interesting study out of England showing that walking for 30 minutes at least 4 or 5 times a week, it increased people's lifespans by 20%. If you tripled that amount of exercise, if you ran for 90 minutes 4 or 5 times a week, you prolonged your lifespan a little bit more, but only by 4%. So you get most of the benefits from just going for a walk.
So you know the kind of power walker who has like a weight in each arm and they're moving their arms back and forth and like their jaws kind of clenched and like they're striding through the street and it's like looks like they're really exerting themselves a whole lot more than I certainly do when I walk. Is that helpful?
It depends completely on what you're trying to get from your exercise. If you're trying to get enjoyment, I would say no. If you are trying to become more fit, which is a different thing than trying to become healthier, then yes, you have to go at a higher intensity. You do have to raise your heart rate more. You do have to get more tired. It does have to feel uncomfortable. That will increase your aerobic endurance. It will not necessarily make you a whole lot healthier. You can become healthy with a much lower amount and a much lower intensity of exercise.
Let's talk about.
Thank you guys very much for listening. I know that clip was kind of long, but basically what Ms. Gretchen was saying is that new studies are showing that walking is actually very beneficial for the body. And when we tie that back into what Christ said in Luke 13:33, we see that he did not say it by chance. So in Genesis chapter 2, verse 15, the Bible tells us that the Lord God placed man in the Garden of Eden to dress it as well as to keep it. When I started looking at that word dress it, I wasn't quite sure what it meant. So I took up my concordance and I saw that the word for dress was the word avad, A-V-A-D. And in Hebrew, that word avad means to labor, to work, particularly to till the soil. So Adam, in essence, was a gardener or a farmer. And I started to think, well, Lord, why did you make Adam a gardener? Why couldn't you make him an architect first? You know, there are plenty trees in the garden. He could have broke down the branches and took the vine and made Eve a nice little 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom home. Or why didn't you make him a painter? He could have taken the berries and the bushes off of the trees and used that tree for a canvas. But then I started to realize the reason why God made Adam a gardener first was so that Adam could have first a physical, then a mental, and then a spiritual connection with Christ. In the book Adventist Home, page 57, it says that the Lord God placed Adam in the garden so that Adam could have a deeper communion with him. As Adam looked at the trees, as he looked at the flowers, as he looked at the animal, he saw God's thumbprint in those creations. Not to worship the creation, but the Creator. In Ecclesiastes 5:12, going back to exercising, it says, the sleep of a laboring man is sweet. Not only when we labor or exercise is our sleeping improved, but it increases our vitality as well as longevity. Now I want us to look at some of the negative ramifications of inactivity. Well, inactivity overall decreases one's quality of life. It not only decreases the quality of life, it causes heart disease, diabetes, particularly type 2 diabetes. And now children even as young as 8 years old are getting diabetes because of obesity and the things they eat and a lack of exercise. It causes osteoporosis in both men and women. It causes cancer, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. And as well, anxiety and depression. Now, we've looked at the negative aspect of inactivity. Let's look at the positive aspects in both a physical as well as a mental realm. Physically, on the heart, the benefits of exercise lowers high blood pressure. It improves circulation. It lowers the cholesterol, which helps protect the body from strokes as well as heart attacks. And it also lowers one's resting pulse rate, which is important because the heart is an organ that never stops beating. So if you lower your resting pulse rate, your heart will not have to work so hard. The mental benefits include improves your sense of well-being. It makes you feel good all around. It increases your energy efficiency as well as endurance in whatever mental activity you are doing. It lifts depression. It reduces your stress. And I remember when I used to be an avid soccer player, every time I was stressed out, I would just go outside and kick the ball or do a scrimmage with some of my friends. And it improves your quality of sleep, as it says in Ecclesiastes 5, verse 12. So the question now becomes, what are some ways, what is the most beneficial way that we can combine exercise to get the maximum health benefit? And the answer is given simply by the picture that you were looking at. Exercising outside in the presence of the sun. And it is true, the sun has gotten a very bad reputation for causing cancer, but then also, some of the foods that we eat as well are even linked to skin cancer. Not only skin cancer, but breast cancer, prostate cancer, colon and rectal cancer. We have to understand that the sun is heaven's gift to us. And just like it says in one of the laws of health, we need to be temperate. Temperate in all things. Like everything that God created, an excess amount of it can have negative ramifications. Not only does the sun make things grow and provide warmth, the sun also allows you to have a nice, smooth, even skin tone. And new research is finding out with that nice, smooth, even skin tone that you get from sun exposure, not sun tanning or sun burning, but increases your overall immunity as well as resistance to any bacteria or infections. The sun also elevates your mood. It's a good prescription for any chronic as well as acute depression. I remember one of the gynecologists at Highlands, she printed up a little thing that she would give to her patients, and I just so happened to get in contact with one of them. And it was talking about, in essence, the 8 laws of health. And one of the things that she prescribed for women who, after they went home and had their babies, was to actually go outside and get some sun. And I found that to be very interesting for someone who is not an Adventist. Sunlight also changes cholesterol from the skin into vitamin D. And we know that vitamin D is necessary for calcium absorption. Each year within the United States, we have 40,000 wrist fractures, 50,000 hip fractures, and it goes on and on and on. And some of you have seen these people in the hospital, and that is essentially due to a lack of vitamin D as well as calcium in the body. And I want us to look at another thing that I found online about the health benefits of the sun.
Campaigns have been as successful as the slip, slop, slap, sun safe message. But that success has led to an increasing number of Tasmanians having a vitamin D deficiency. That's put the Cancer Council in a predicament because there's a growing body of evidence linking a lack of vitamin D to a number of other cancers. The Council and other authorities are now trying to find a balance, working out how to recommend some sun exposure while at the same time protecting against skin cancer. As the last of the autumn leaves fall and the sun moves lower in the sky, Tasmanians naturally rug up and head indoors. For Paul Jackson, regardless of the season, most of his time is spent inside.
I work in IT, which means I'm behind a computer inside a building 90% of the day, and my interests outside of IT tend to be things like astronomy, which means I don't get very much sunlight.
He's one of an increasing number of Tasmanians being found to be vitamin D deficient.
I went to see the doctor for some medical tests, and he advised that I have blood tests, and one of the blood tests that they did was for vitamin D deficiency, and sure enough it came back fairly low.
A third of the population were vitamin D deficient even during our summer months. And then when you're talking into your winter and spring months, that jumps up as high as 2/3.
Unless you're at the extreme end of deficiency, there are often no symptoms. Researchers have long known there's a link between vitamin D and the onset of multiple sclerosis, but now there's a growing body of research linking the lack of vitamin D to an increasing number of other chronic diseases.
There is some evidence coming through to show that vitamin D deficiency may impact on breast cancer risk, colon cancer risk and prostate cancer risk. Unfortunately, we don't have any Tasmania-specific studies to show what's happening here on a local level, but there is enough evidence out there now that we need to look at and we need to start acting upon.
There are also concerns there could be links to influenza, cardiovascular disease and mental health.
There's some emerging evidence in that area as well, depression, for example.
Senior researcher at the Menzies Institute, Ingrid van der Meij, says for a long time it was thought vitamin D was only involved in bone health.
When they found that there are actually vitamin D receptors on many cells in your body, so in your immune system, in your brain cells, in your colon, that's where people started to think, hey, there must be much more to vitamin D than just the influence on bone health, and that's where the research started.
Vitamin D is not like other vitamins.
It's actually not a vitamin, it's a steroid hormone, and as a result, it binds to receptors in your cell and mediates its effect via that pathway.
Doctors are starting to take notice. General practitioner Jeff Chapman says it wasn't long ago that people in aged care facilities were the only ones being tested.
I think we assumed that most of the rest of the population, if they led a relatively active life, would have adequate levels. We don't assume that any longer, so we are certainly looking more widely.
Test results are often unexpected.
We're seeing a broad range. It's quite surprising. We're seeing surprisingly low levels in people who you would not think had low levels. We're seeing quite adequate levels in people who you think might satisfy one of those risk groups.
The full picture on vitamin D isn't yet clear, but it seems, like iron, some people are better at absorbing it than others.
So we see the health impacts that vitamin D has. As she said, it's been shown to be linked with breast cancer. It's been shown to be linked with prostate cancer, all other types of cancers. So we need to expose ourselves to the sun. So the question becomes, what are the appropriate amounts to expose ourselves to the sun that we do not get sunburned? What we need to understand is that everyone is different. For a darker-skinned individual, you would need to spend more time in the sun than a lighter-skinned individual. The lighter you are, the more easier you are to be sunburned. For the darker-skinned individual, they can definitely start out with 15 minutes a day, but for the lighter individual, to work up to 15 minutes a day and eventually the max for 30. As well, when you go outside, if you don't wear glasses, you need to wear some protective shades because the UV light coming from the sun can destroy the retina in your eyes. So you need to protect yourself. And finally, exposing your hands as well as your face is the parts on your body where the sun is most absorbed because that is where you have the most receptors. Another thing that you can do is open up your home to sunshine. The sun not only kills the little microbacteria in the home, but you also filter out the UV light through the windows and get sun through that means as well. So in closing, what we need to remember is that the Lord created the sunshine, the open air, as well as exercise for our benefit. As it says in Malachi 4, verse 2, "But unto you that fear my name shall the Son of Righteousness," the S-U-N of righteousness, "arise with healing in his wings." Thank you very much.
Amen. closing song, let's sing